The Gentle Giant story is brought to you by the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture and Great Sports Moments YouTube channel.
When I started working on this documentary some 8 years ago, I was upset with myself because I'd never interviewed Andre Rodgers. After all, I'm a journalist and he was my father. But it wasn't until recently that I realized that this was in fact a blessing in disguise. You see, Daddy was much too humble to adequately tell his own story. He played down every single one of his accomplishments. And this documentary would have been very different if I had interviewed him. So this is your whole story, Daddy, told by everyone else, complete with all of your accomplishments. This one is for you, Daddy, with love.
Andre Rodgers wraps a single to center that sends Santo hurrying home with a tying run, and it's a brand new ball game.
Andre had the best arm I'd ever seen on a human being. He could go in that hole and throw your strike about that high.
The way he played baseball was just so beautiful. His movement, his throwing, his rhythm, his feet and his swing, and everything had so much rhythm to it.
Born in Nassau, Bahamas in 1934, Kenneth Andre Ian Rodgers was the first of 7 children. His father, Arnold, was a civil servant and local cricket star. His mother, Carmencita, worked a variety of retail jobs, but was primarily a self-made coach and cheerleader to all the neighborhood children. The Rodgers home was filled with love, discipline, and strong Christian values, and was the center of activity in the Nassau Street community.
We all started to learn the game of cricket in the backyard through our father, who taught us about cricket, the different fundamentals of how to play the game, and he also taught us how to position ourselves on the field and make different plays.
A few years later, Andre was making quite a name for himself as one of the Bahamas' leading cricket players, so much so that Buck O'Neill, who was by then a scout for the Chicago Cubs, made it a point to go and see this Andre Rodgers.
I was in Miami looking at some ball players, and Monk Silver, he said, Buck, there's a guy down in Nassau that can really got a great arm. I said, yeah. I said, let's go down there and see him. So I took him with me, and we went down there, and I got a chance to see Andre, but Andre cricket, yeah. But I saw the cricket, then I saw him in baseball and saw him throw the ball. So I told my organization about him, see. But that's where I saw this young man, fine young man, 6'2". Yeah, 190 pounds, a good-looking kid.
But it was Harry Joines, a Canadian educator living in Nassau at the time, who wrote to the New York Giants farm system and recommended that they give Andre a tryout. The Giants organization wrote back saying yes, but that Andre would have to pay his own way and, if signed, he would be reimbursed. In March of 1954, Andre and his cousin Tex Lunn were on their way to try their luck at baseball.
Unfortunately, Andre had problems with immigration because he didn't have the appropriate papers at the time. So Tex went on to spring training and Andre was sent back. Tex didn't make it, but to show you the nature of his character, he said, listen, I may not be good enough, but you got to see my cousin. He said, this guy is the real thing. So it was because of that that the organization decided to give Andre a chance, because he had problems with immigration. You know, they wanted to sort of wash their hands, right? And so Andre had a second chance because of Tex. And when he went back, of course, the rest is history.
Carl Hubbell, the great Carl Hubbell. Many people recall him the Giants of yesteryear. Carl Hubbell's in charge of spring training in 1954. And Carl Hubble sees this 6'3" Bahamian kid, and he says, "Where do you play?" Andre Rodgers looks at Carl Hubble and he says, "I've hardly ever played baseball, certainly not organized baseball." Carl Hubble thinks literally somebody's pulling his leg. He said, "Well, you go and play shortstop." Andre Rodgers impresses Carl Hubble so much so that he's on the Giants farm system, and he gets to play in 1954 in a place called Orleans. In the Giants farm system, he bats 286 that year, and everything opens up. Now, could you imagine, this tall kid from the Bahamas, he's playing before a Bahamas Baseball Association is formed. We're playing cricket. And then the word gets out, look, to play for the Giants, you better go to the Bahamas and play cricket.
While in spring training in Melbourne, Florida, Andre writes to Mr. Joins,
"They told me that I have the making of a good ball player, and so they kept me, and now it looks like keeping me has paid off. I signed a contract last night to play for Olean. They will be paying me $150 per month, and I was so happy that I signed right away."
Andre was now playing Class D Pony League ball in the minor leagues in Orleans, New York, with nothing more than a crash course in baseball. He talked about this period of his life in a rare interview when he retired.
There's also a man who helped me over there too. His name was Alex Pompez. He was a Giant scout at that time. And he used to carry me to the ballpark and told me specifically to watch the shortstop. He said, because that's your position. So I said, well, that's the position I played back home, playing softball. And, well, I developed through watching others and being helped also.
Great throwing arm. He was a very strong guy, strong hands, He shake your hands and, you got to stand firm because he got great hands. He was a great ball player, period. He loved Elvis Presley. He loved him. We saw every movie he made. So we did a couple of girls together too. Yeah.
Andre had quickly become one of the top prospects in the Giants organization. And in 1955, it was on to St. Cloud, Minnesota, for Andre to play Class C baseball.
He just had an awful lot of talent. I look at Andre and look at the things that he could do at that time. We don't have kids in our organization in our minor league that could do the things that Andre Rodgers could do at that time, because he was, like I say, he was like 6'2" or 3". He could hit the ball out of the ballpark. He had a great arm. He had outstanding glove. He was a very, very good fielder. So he had all the great tools to be a great, great player.
During the 55 season, Andre again writes to Mr. Joins.
"In the dinners they gave us in St. Cloud, they introduced the ball players to the folks on the committee. Charlie Fox told me if I have a good year with him, I may go to AA or AAA next season, and I only pray I do. I am just as sure of you and the missus pulling for me as I am sure of myself. The only trouble I can find is that I always get down on myself, and when I do, in comes the slump. But I'm going to try even harder this season, and Fox said that I was one of the most wonderful things to happen to the Giants in many a year. Thanks to you. I will do my best not to let you down."
That year, Andre went on to win the Northern League's batting crown. He was voted to the All-Star team and selected as the league's MVP. Andre's next season in 1956 was with the Dallas Eagles in the AA Texas League, where he was again named to the All-Star team.
So here's a guy trying to make it as a professional baseball player who had never played baseball before. And in fact, in one of his very first trips to spring training with the Giants in New York, before he had ever made the major leagues, a writer asked him, "Do you think you can hit major league pitching?" And his response was, "I don't know, I've never seen major league pitching." And yet, in the minor leagues, he had incredible seasons. He hit nearly .391 season, won the batting championship, won the Triple Crown in AAA, the highest level of minor league baseball, in 1958, a season in which he played a small amount with the Giants in San Francisco. He spent most of that season in Phoenix in the Pacific Coast League, and he hit about .380, and he hit over 30 home runs, and he drove in nearly 100 runs, was a unanimous all-star choice and a unanimous pick for MVP. So He was a superstar throughout the minor leagues before he ever established himself as a major leaguer.
On April 16, 1957, Andre played his first game with the New York Giants, which made him the first Bahamian to play Major League Baseball. A U.S. newspaper reported that there have been others who have matched his skill in the past, but none could match Andre's jet-propelled jump to the majors.
He was coming so fast. He went to C-ball, he went to AA, then he went to the big league right away. I remember the Giants spring training. They played a game in Iowa. I remember Andre made the team, New York Giants. So he started that game. I remember they were talking about him, this kid going to be a huge future Hall of Famer. And he can do it all. He's only 20 years old. And that motivated me. Watching that game, watching Andre, because I knew Andre playing and say, someday I'm going to be in that game. And the following year, I played that game. So he helped me in my career.
He was like the Jackie Robinson of Major League Baseball in the United States, the Jackie Robinson of the Bahamas for baseball. Because once they got a look and a taste of Andre Rodgers, then the Bahamas was accepted. And, you know, the testimony to that is the fact that after Andre, we had scores and scores of Bahamians playing Major League Baseball. They were invited, and the Bahamas was really like a breeding ground for professional baseball players. And he set the stage. He was the pioneer. And that's an aspect to his life that a lot of people kind of gloss over, but it was instrumental because we are what we are in baseball and connected to baseball today because of Andre Rodgers.
1958 was a big year for Andre. In February, he married his high school sweetheart Eunice Bethel, and by December, the first of his 4 children was born. In April, the New York Giants left the Polo Grounds in Manhattan, New York, and moved west to Seal Stadium in San Francisco, and the San Francisco Giants were born. The residents of San Francisco loved their new team and welcomed them to their new home. Andre was there when it all began and is one of the original San Francisco Giants. Andre was able to cope with the racial tension in San Francisco, but expectations for him, the minor league phenom, were extremely high, putting him under enormous pressure. And it was no secret that Giants owner Horace Stoneham wanted to play Andre, while team manager Bill Rigney had his eyes set on another tall, lanky shortstop, Ed Pursuit.
Horace obviously was enthralled with Andre's potential. Bill Rigney, I had played for him in the minor leagues at AAA, and we'd won the Little World Series, and I played for him the next year. We did well. I was a tall, skinny kid out of California. He was a tall, skinny kid out of California who was also played a shortstop. So I think we had an affinity between the two of us, and that probably ran over into the feelings that with Horace wanted Andre and Bill wanted me. But it's a natural thing, I think, and Horace thought that Andre would be coming on in with those talents and become a superstar. When you're competing for a sole position, you're hoping that you do better than the other fella. You don't want to wish him ill, but you want to win the job. So I don't think there was any ill feeling between the two of us, except that we both really wanted to be the #1 shortstop. And as a result of that, some people might have perceived that as an alienation. I did not.
Some people felt that the Giants spring training hitting coach, Lefty O'Doul, was the reason Andre was under such pressure.
Andre was such a great hitter, very strong hitter. So he used to hit to left center and right center with power. And Lefty O'Doul was a great hitter. He pulled everything. So he wanted me and Andre to be a pull hitter because he used to hit to right field like Andre. So he wanted me to be a pull hitter
like him. I told the guy, I won't do it. I said, Andre, don't change. But he convinced Andre to be a poor hitter, and that ruined him as a hitter.
Nonetheless, everyone marveled at Andre's temperament, his easygoing manner and down-to-earth style, which always made him shy away from the spotlight. At the end of the 1960 season, Andre was traded to the Milwaukee Braves, and by the end of spring training in '61, he was traded again to the Chicago Cubs. Here, he would spend the next 4 seasons and have the best years in his major league career. In 1962, he became the regular shortstop for the Cubs when they moved Ernie Banks to first base.
When we first met in the locker room, he said hello, I said hello to him. We had a lot in common and had a lot of feeling for each other. Although he was raised in a different environment than me, we just connected, and he went out on the field, he started catching ground balls and throwing the first and swinging, and I would watch him and see him hit, to see how he would run around the base. All the things he did, he just knew what he was doing on the field. He just could feel it, and I could feel it in him, that he just knew the game and knew how to play it, and he was a very private guy. He didn't talk to a lot of people. He just, played the game. That's what he did, just played the game. That's what I learned from him, because that's what I did when I came back and started playing with the Cubs. I just played to learn the game and go home. That's it.
He was a great gentleman. He was quiet, and he was one of the earliest tall shortstops, and had a great arm. I tell you, if you hit that ball over in the hole and Andre got his hand on it, you might as well turn around and go the other way, because he had that really powerful arm. And in those days, most shortstops were smaller guys, and he was kind of unique in that regard. And another thing is that he was a good low ball hitter, and most right-hand hitters seem to be high ball hitters. Left-hand hitters seem to be low ball hitters. So if you got a tall, rangy right-hand hitter, low ball hitter, he looked good. He was an asset to the ball club.
It was just like we were brothers. I mean, like we connected like we were brothers. And the way he played baseball was just so beautiful. His movement, his throwing, his rhythm, his feet and his swing, and everything had so much rhythm to it.
I think what happened when he got to Chicago was that the Cubs were starting to think about moving their best player, Ernie Banks, from shortstop to first base to enable his career to last longer, get away from the physical demands of playing shortstop, put him at first base. And so they needed somebody to take over at shortstop, and they were attracted to Andre, and so they got him in a trade with Milwaukee in 1961, and Andre was given the starting shortstop job, and it was his to lose. And I think the fact that he got the shortstop job, there was nobody else vying for it at the time, and the fact that he was away from San Francisco, a city that he liked, and he had friends on the team, but I think there was just a lot of pressure to be a certain player that he hadn't yet been able to be in San Francisco. And so going to Chicago, I think some of that pressure was alleviated. Also, he had been in the States for a number of years. He was probably just more comfortable with everything about Major League Baseball and living in the U.S. Chicago's a great city. He's closer to his home in the Bahamas. And so I think he was more relaxed. He had the job every day, and he had his best season, not surprisingly. He had 278. He played a solid shortstop. And there weren't any complaints about his defense. There weren't any complaints about his offense. He was in there and he was playing every day. And so I'm sure if he were sitting here with us right now, he would say that first year with the Cubs in Chicago was his best year in the majors.
Andre's friends and family members were also flying up from the Bahamas to see him play.
What a phenomenal day that it was, man. At home plate, at Wrigley Field, Vince Scully interviewing us and we presenting a special plaque to Andre at home plate. I mean, that was, for me, the climax of all that we did in baseball.
But Melrose throws wild to third base, and Andre Rodgers crosses the plate on the error.
Well, Andre was one of the original icons way back in the 50s and certainly into the 60s.
It was also in 1962 when Andre, Ken Hubbs, and Ernie Banks had a double play record, making him one of only 3 Bahamians to have held an international sporting record and the only Bahamian to have a Major League Baseball record.
We had that feeling of togetherness, the 3 of us. I played first, they played short at second. And we had that feeling of togetherness. And that's what I learned of all the things I did in baseball is togetherness. You got to play together.
Herb was young, Andre was young, but Andre, you know, was experienced enough to help him along. And Ernie was on playing first base now. So, and he could help these kids because Andre at shortstop. And Andre had the best arm I'd ever seen on a human being. He could go in that hole and throw your strike about that high, all the way over there, could play. And he came, and some of the guys, you know, tried to intimidate him, coming in, breaking up the double play. I said, Andre, you know what you do? What you do is you get that ball and just aim straight at him and throw to first base. And so he started coming on the bag and aiming at him, and they started ducking and laying down. He didn't have any trouble anymore on the double play.
In 1963, Andre was still at the top of his game, and he led all National League shortstops in putouts, assists, total chances, and double plays. While he did have problems with the curveball, he was always able to hit the fastball, and he even hit 2 home runs off of perhaps the greatest pitcher of all time, Sandy Koufax. George Altman was the first ball player to hit 2 home runs off of Sandy Koufax in the same game.
He's the only guy that I've seen that throw directly overhand and the low ball seemed to rise, you know. Most of the time the high ball rise, but Sandy Koufax. And then he had that real big curveball, you know. So now Andre, again, being a good low ball hitter, that helped him, I imagine, to hit that home run off Sandy Koufax, yeah.
When I went to the Dodgers, that's, I think the year Koufax won, what, 27 or 28 games. I played third base every day. I almost didn't need a glove when he pitched because nobody ever hit the ball. So he was fantastic. So if they say he could hit Koufax, that's pretty good. I mean, not many guys can say they hit Koufax.
As he wound up his Major League Baseball career, Andre spent his last 3 seasons from 65 to 67 with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He still saw a good bit of action as a utility player in 65 and pinch hit at a .308 batting average.
I was the shortstop at Pittsburgh, and then for some reason, I remember him hitting a home run because they took me out of the lineup. He played shortstop that day and hit a home run. So, of course, as a teammate, you're glad the guy hits a home run, but it wasn't too long after that I was gone. So, and then, but he didn't get to play much at all with Pittsburgh, which I couldn't understand because he was a good player. So, I mean, they do some strange things.
Over the next few years, Andre would bring a number of baseball players home with him in the off-season for visits. And he was instrumental in organizing an exhibition game in Nassau. Andre returned home in 1970 and retired from professional baseball completely. In all, Andre appeared in 854 Major League Baseball games and finished with a .249 lifetime average, having hit 45 home runs and batting in 245 runs. Now in retirement and living back in the Bahamas, Andre played for and coached a number of softball and baseball teams. He also managed the 1971 national team that went to the National Baseball Congress tournament in Wichita, Kansas. Baseball was now on the upward swing in the Bahamas, and it was Andre's groundbreaking career that ushered in a dramatic shift in popularity from cricket to baseball in the 1960s and 70s. In the Rodgers household alone, 3 of Andre's brothers had made it into the minor leagues, with a 4th brother narrowly missing his chance because of an injury in spring training. By the 1980s, 4 more Bahamians had made it to the major leagues.
When Andre came back home, he would always sit down and talk to the ball players, right? He would show them different fundamentals about the game, but talk about the game, things he should do, things he shouldn't do. And he was very friendly, and it didn't matter who it was. He would go to any one of the ball players who he saw needed help, and he would point out their mistake to them and show them how it was done. And I think that inspired a lot of ball players.
And Andre was the first person really showed me how to turn the double play. And fielding, he really taught me a lot, you know. And even as a young man growing up, Andre, even though he was such a fierce competitor, Andre was a gentleman.
I won an RBI crown in baseball, one of the highest achievements in baseball. I missed out the home run crown by a couple of points, you know, through all the things that Andre taught me. Everything he taught me, the technique, everything. And I'll never forget him for that. And what he always said to me, he said, now let me tell you something, Boots. I want you to go and you spread this to everybody else. This is not just for you. I said, what you mean? Suppose I don't want to tell him. He said, your job is to take this further.
We started the Nationals, the Bahamas Baseball Nationals, that encompass all the islands that has plays baseball in the Bahamas. And the #1 name that come up was Andre Rodgers. And so we named the Nationals the Andre Rodgers National Baseball Championships. That is going now on its 13th year, and it's going strong and stronger every year.
You need people to teach. We also need people to teach the game, like Andre Rodgers and some of the other people we have here. To me, he was my mentor and all. And I always told him that because I hung up with him sometimes, you know, not on the ball field because I was kind of young to be around those places. But I always respected him. And, you know, our Bahamian people need to be more knowledgeable about the people we had and the people we have and respect them for what they were. We need to do documentations on our own athletes. We need to educate our young people on who our people are.
Our conversations early on when I was really young was always about, you know, the fundamentals of the game, hitting, fielding, throwing, you know, how to treat the game, how to respect the game, how to love the game, because it'll love you back if you do the right things with the game, you know. And from as early as 7, 8, 9 years old, there's one constant thing that has always been left with me from Uncle Andre, and it's something that I do innately. Is when I shake somebody's hand, I shake their hand really firm. And when I shake these little boys' hands around here, I shake their hand, I say, come on, that's not how you shake a hand. And as a child, all I could remember is Uncle Andre squeezing the hell out of my hand if I didn't shake his hand back. And he always talked about building my forearms. Every day, Uncle Andre is here at this baseball complex through myself and through Uncle Adrian, through Jackie, and through everybody, through Bertie Murray, all the lives that he's had the opportunity to touch here at this baseball field.
In 1989, Andre was inducted into the National Sports Hall of Fame in the Bahamas, and a baseball stadium at the Queen Elizabeth Sports Center was named in his honor. While the baseball diamond has since been torn down, Andre's legacy still lives on.
I would call him the gentle giant. He has always taken his international stardom or status as like, I'm just Andre Rodgers, you know, it don't matter to me. I mean, the things that he accomplished in his profession in baseball and even once he got back, of course, you know, politics came in. He came back to the Bahamas and again, didn't have the kind of, I felt, recognition that should really uplift him as to what he had done for the country, because long before there was any PLB, FNM, or all these other things, he was out there putting the Bahamas on the map.
Andre Rodgers played 11 years in the major leagues, was a career .249 hitter, hit about 45 home runs. Especially with the expectations that were applied to him as he came up through San Francisco in 1958. I think if he were sitting here, he would say he didn't do as well as he wished he had done. But when you really look at where he came from and the fact that he never played baseball throughout his childhood, he had never played baseball before he arrived in Florida in 1954 to go to his first Major League Baseball spring training camp. He had never seen a baseball game, hardball game. He didn't know what a curveball was. He had grown up playing softball and cricket. And for a guy to do what he did, just to reach the major leagues, not to mention all of his success in the minor leagues, and to last 11 years in the majors, living in a new country, in a new culture, dealing with the racism that was prevalent in the U.S. back in those days. To me, his story is an incredibly successful and heartwarming story.
After fighting a respiratory illness, Andre died in December 2004. And while the pages of history will show that to date, 60 years after his career began, Andre played in the major leagues longer than any other Bahamian. What the pages of history won't show is how much he loved his family and how more than anything he was proud of his strong and enduring relationship with his community.
Andre Rodgers was a ball player, yes. He was the first Bahamian to play Major League Ball, but we are not going to pigeonhole him as a great sports hero of the Bahamas. He was a Bahamian hero. He was a young man who had never played baseball in his life. And he did not let that deter him. He went on to become a great baseball player in the United States, in a country where millions of children aspire every year to enter Major League Baseball, where they start from the playground and they go right up through school. He did not have that. I want them to get the message that they can do anything that they want to do, that the size of their country does not determine the size of their achievement. And he was such a wonderful example of that. And so that is the message, that we, right in our neighborhood, we grew a Bahamian hero that every child, including my granddaughter, has to know about as a part of her heritage.
The Gentle Giant story is brought to you by the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture and Great Sports Moments YouTube channel.